McLaren is the only top team that hasn't shown a single image of their 2026 car. Not a teaser. Not a render. Not even a hint. And that's not just unusual, it's deliberate. Because what's happening behind closed doors in Woking might be bigger than anyone expected. Insiders say the car's already built. It's already tested. And it includes a system so untraceable, rival teams are already drafting protests before the first race. There's a reason McLaren isn't releasing anything yet. It's not about secrecy. It's about timing. And if the rumors are true, the car is hiding a mechanism that exploits one of the FIA's most dangerous blind spots. Stick around because later in this video, we'll break down the exact component that may be so advanced, even the FIA wouldn't know how to ban it. And if you've ever been the kind of viewer who spots the twist before everyone else, you'll want to watch this one all the way through. Every other major team has already released something. Ferrari revealed their full power unit integration package in December. Red Bull teased its RB20 successor in a stylized render. Even Mercedes, notorious for keeping secrets, shared wind tunnel footage of early aero concepts. But McLaren? Not a word. No official render. No pre-season launch event. No press briefings. Just silence. And in a sport where even shadows on a garage door can trigger speculation, McLaren's absence isn't just suspicious. It's strategic. Officially, McLaren says nothing is delayed. They claim they're operating on schedule, and that details will be released in due course. But here's what doesn't add up. Multiple insiders have confirmed that McLaren completed its FIA homologation submissions in November, weeks ahead of most teams. Which means the car exists. It's not behind schedule. It's not a digital model waiting to be built. It's real, complete, and likely undergoing closed-loop testing in environments the public has no access to. So why the blackout? Teams don't withhold this kind of information unless they're trying to protect something. And that protection usually falls into one of two categories. Either you've discovered a technical loophole and you want to exploit it before the FIA shuts it down. Or you've made a radical decision and you're buying time to figure out if it's going to explode in your face. McLaren isn't a midfield team anymore. They're the reigning constructors' champions. They know exactly how their secrecy will be perceived. And yet they're choosing to remain quiet anyway. That's not caution. That's control. What makes this even more alarming is what's been happening around McLaren, not within it. In recent weeks, multiple rival teams have quietly submitted inquiries to the FIA regarding structural material classifications under the 2026 technical guidelines. The timing is no coincidence. It suggests that maybe several teams suspect that McLaren has built something that sits in a legal blind zone. Not illegal. Not yet. But far enough outside the expected playbook that other teams are requesting clarification before the car is even seen. And that's a pattern F1 veterans will recognize from the sport's most controversial innovations. Think back to Ferrari's 2019 fuel flow scandal. Or Mercedes' DAS system in 2020. Or even Red Bull's FlexiFloor rumors in the cost cap era. None of those systems were banned when they were first introduced. They were hidden in plain sight, exploited in silence until they became too effective to ignore. McLaren, based on everything we're seeing so far, might be attempting the same play. But instead of hiding it on track, they're hiding it before the car even leaves the garage. And the implications are massive. If the MCL40 is built around a structural or aerodynamic principle that isn't clearly defined in the new FIA rulebook, they'll be untouchable for the first half of the season at minimum. Because once a car is homologated and declared legal by the FIA, any mid-season challenge becomes political, not technical. Which means McLaren may not just be preparing to race. They may be preparing to win uncontested, until the rest of the grid catches up. If they ever do. But here's the part no one's asking. What kind of concept is so disruptive, so secretive, that even the launch of the car must be delayed until the last possible moment? What's buried inside this chassis that's worth sacrificing media attention, launch coverage, and even sponsor exposure to protect? That's what we'll explore in the next block, because some insiders believe the MCL40 isn't just hiding a part. It's hiding a system, one that rewrites how the car behaves, and how the FIA defines control itself. The first real clue about what McLaren might be hiding came from an unlikely source, a supply chain trace. In Q4 of 2025, a specialized UK-based composite firm, one previously contracted by aerospace manufacturers, filed a shipment report showing bulk delivery of a proprietary heat-reactive polymer to McLaren Racing. The material in question had only been tested in military applications before, due to its shape memory properties under thermal stress. It isn't banned by the FIA. It's not even mentioned. But its behavior under real race conditions could give McLaren a structural advantage that no one else on the grid has even considered. Not through more power. Not through less drag. but through predictive chassis response, a concept F1 has never formally addressed. Here's how it allegedly works. The MCL40's underfloor architecture has been constructed with a blend of conventional carbon fiber and this memory-reactive compound. Under specific aerodynamic loads and thermal buildup, the floor subtly reshapes. Not enough to constitute flexing in the illegal sense, but enough to modify the boundary layer flow under high-speed compression zones. It's not a moving part. It's not active aero. But it changes the car's aerodynamic behavior precisely when traditional setups begin to lose stability. And because it happens without mechanical input, the FIA has no framework to classify it as illegal. This isn't theoretical. Because according to two engineers familiar with wind tunnel testing data, the MCL40's airflow profile remains remarkably consistent regardless of ride height variation. That consistency is unnatural under the new 2026 chassis rules, which introduced more restrictive floor tunnels and stricter vertical compliance checks. If McLaren has found a way to smooth out flow disruption through passive structural behavior, they've effectively neutralized one of the key limitations that all other teams are still trying to manage. It's like building a car that automatically adjusts itself to the track without any controls. And the silence around it only reinforces that something very real is in play. But that's just the surface. The second, more worrying piece of information came from inside the FIA. A mid-November report, not published publicly but seen by select team principals, flagged non-standard deformation behavior during McLaren's static load tests. The car passed the tests. But according to a source who reviewed the data, the deformation zones didn't behave like traditional carbon structures. They compressed differently, and more importantly recovered differently. That suggests not just flexibility, but stored energy behavior. In plain terms, the car might be using its own structure as a passive regulator. And the FIA has no precedent for how to interpret that. Red Bull and Mercedes, upon hearing about the report, immediately requested clarification on material intention. That's the technical phrase used when a team pushes the boundary between functionality and compliance. But the FIA declined to comment. Not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. There's no existing regulation that defines how fast, or under what conditions, a structure must return to its original form. Only that it does. So, McLaren's system is legal by default, but possibly untouchable in protest terms unless someone finds a clear contradiction. This brings us to what might be the most controversial part of the MCL40 design. According to unconfirmed but persistent reports, McLaren's engineers may have engineered a form of ride profile memory into the car's central spine, effectively embedding behavior into the structure rather than programming it through electronics. Under specific loads, the car remembers how it should sit at corner entry, and retains that geometry even if track surface conditions change. The behavior isn't driven by hydraulics or actuators. It's just there, locked into the molecular behavior of the car. No signal. No trigger. Just intelligent material use that mimics active suspension without ever violating the rules. And this is where the line begins to blur. Because what McLaren may have done isn't illegal. It's invisible. To fans, to sensors, to telemetry reviews. And unless another team can replicate the materials, validate the deformation, and prove intent, there may be no way to challenge it. Which means, heading into 2026, the most dominant car on the grid might be the one no one's seen. And the one no one can quite explain. Coming up next, why McLaren's car might not just be uncatchable, but unprotestable. What makes McLaren's 2026 project so destabilizing isn't just what the car might be doing. It's what that behavior exposes. Because for the first time in the new hybrid era, we're looking at a Formula One car designed not just to operate within the rules, but to exploit the incompleteness of those rules. The floor isn't flexing. The materials aren't illegal. The structure passes every test. But the system as a whole appears to do something the FIA never anticipated. It reacts without input, and it adapts without intervention. That's the problem. Because the FIA's 2026 regulation package, though heavily updated, still relies on language rooted in the idea of control. Control by the driver. Control by the software. Control by predefined systems. What McLaren may have built is a car that behaves as if it's controlled, but without any controller. It mimics feedback loops. It reshapes itself. But it does so mechanically, naturally, and silently. And that means the current regulatory framework has no language to define what McLaren is doing, let alone outlaw it. Internally, this is already creating division. According to sources close to FIA engineering briefings, there have been at least 2 closed-door meetings where the phrase untraceable behavior was used. Not to describe cheating. Not to accuse McLaren of wrongdoing. But to articulate a terrifying new problem. How do you police performance when you don't know what caused it? This isn't like DAS, where a moving steering column could be filmed. This isn't like a fuel flow hack, where telemetry left a trail. This is deeper. This is the first time in modern F1 that the governing body may be facing a car it cannot understand in full. And it gets worse. Because McLaren's silence is itself a kind of legal shield. They haven't claimed innovation. They haven't revealed a new technology. They've simply homologated a car that meets all physical checks. And by refusing to explain what makes it different, they've denied the FIA any procedural entry point. If the governing body wants to challenge them, it would need to prove intent. And in Formula One, intent is the hardest thing to document. Especially when the design philosophy is distributed across dozens of components and behaviors. Rival teams are trapped in a similar position. They suspect something is happening, something profound. But they don't know where to look. Because the advantage isn't in one obvious element. It's systemic. It's built into the materials, the geometry, the way the car sits at speed. It's a behavioral advantage, not a mechanical one. And that makes it effectively impossible to copy in time for round one. By the time the paddock sees what the car does in Bahrain, the engineering window to respond will have already closed. This is where the real twist emerges. Because McLaren may have figured out the perfect timing gap. A concept that takes full advantage of the new regulation's ambiguity before the FIA has time to respond. By not showing the car, by not naming the behavior, they've created a moving target, one that can't be hit without first being fully seen. And if McLaren dominates the opening rounds, they'll be doing it with a system that the FIA can't retroactively classify without admitting its own oversight. That level of political leverage is rare. And incredibly dangerous in the wrong hands. But there's a deeper irony beneath it all. The 2026 regulation reset was designed to stop this very kind of loophole exploitation. It was meant to level the playing field, reduce development arms races, and limit passive engineering games. Yet here we are before the season even begins. Watching one team reshape the competitive narrative by building something so compliant. It might be completely untouchable. And this raises the most uncomfortable question of all. If the car's legal and unbeatable, does the FIA have the authority to act at all? Or are we watching a sport that has lost the ability to enforce fairness? Because it failed to define it in the first place? In the next block, we'll explore why some insiders believe the MCL40's real threat isn't performance. It's precedent. What no one is saying out loud, at least not on record, is that McLaren's real innovation isn't mechanical. It's philosophical. Because they haven't just built a car. They've engineered a situation. One where the car's performance is secondary to its unprotestability, where its legality lies not in what it is, but in what others can't prove it to be. And in doing so, McLaren is quietly redefining what power looks like in Formula One. Not through overt dominance, but through strategic invisibility. This approach changes everything. Because for decades, innovation in F1 followed a clear rhythm. Build something new, test its legality, fight the protest, win races before the ban arrives. McLaren is bypassing that entirely. They've built a system designed from the ground up not to trigger protest. Not by hiding from the rules, but by hiding within them. The behavior is distributed across the car. Subtle shifts in stiffness here, micro deformations there, airflow redirection that only appears under thermal load. No single feature screams illegal. But together, they might produce the kind of consistency and balance that no other car on the grid can match. And if that's true, then the silence is the system. By refusing to show the car, McLaren isn't just avoiding scrutiny. They're controlling the moment of revelation. Because once the car hits the track, every camera, every sensor, every analyst will be watching. But by then, it will be too late. Because understanding how the system behaves in real time is one thing. Reverse engineering its intent? That's another. Especially when the car's competitive advantage might not be lap time, but repeatability. The ability to behave identically under changing track conditions, tire states, and thermal pressures. That's what wins championships. This is where the FIA finds itself exposed. Because it's not just the car they're struggling to define. It's their own authority. For years, they've relied on technical directives to contain innovation after it surfaces. But what happens when the innovation never announces itself? When it exists in the spaces between behaviors? In materials that react without triggering regulations? In systems that do not need to be switched on because they're never technically off? McLaren is showing what happens when a team builds for regulatory latency, the delay between innovation and enforcement. And right now, that delay is widening. Other teams are watching this unfold in real time. And what's terrifying them isn't just McLaren's potential pace. It's the implication that this is the new frontier. If McLaren succeeds, it sets a precedent that could fracture technical development for years. No longer will teams pursue visible upgrades, obvious gains, or headline innovations. They'll chase silence. Opacity. They'll begin to engineer around detection, not just around performance. And once that race begins, it becomes a battle of who can disappear the fastest. Not who can build the fastest car. The commercial side of the sport isn't immune to this shift either. Liberty Media, always focused on marketability and storyline, now faces a dilemma. What happens when the most dominant car on the grid is also the least visible? How do you sell a season when the advantage lies in secrecy rather than spectacle? And if McLaren wins not with showy aero, but with internal geometry and material compliance, does that grow the sport, or undermine its very appeal? This moment could mark a turning point. Not because of what the MCL 40 is, but because of what it refuses to be. It's not an open source design. It's not a breakthrough anyone can replicate. It's a closed loop of knowledge, development, and silence, built by a team that understands the difference between technical superiority and strategic timing. And unless the FIA acts preemptively, this could become the blueprint for the next era of Formula One. One where the winning edge is no longer what you build, but what no one can ever prove you built at all.